I'm just going to give you a rundown of what's happening next. We're going to have a short fireside to talk about how policymakers can help solve the global hunger crisis. And then a very cool panel with young folks, influencers who are really advocating on these issues. And I'm so excited to talk to them. And then we're going to have a really wonderful lunch. So don't even think about leaving. I will lock the doors. So I want to invite our next moderator, someone I really love, Zoya Teirstein, a staff writer at Grist. Please give her a round of applause. And then Rebecca Middleton, the Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at the World Food Program USA. Huge round of applause. Thank you both.
I was so excited to get on the stage.
I know, you just couldn't wait.
Couldn't help myself.
All right, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk about hunger with Rebecca. I think it's a really important conversation to have. I work for Grist, which is an international environmental magazine, and I cover climate change and human health, which is a really fascinating topic that also dovetails with worldwide hunger. So in 1992, an Australian, a researcher, kind of curmudgeonly, his name was Tony McMichael, published research that showed an explicit detail for the first time that just 5 climate change-fueled threats were killing 166,000 people per year. If you extrapolate that out to the end of this year, that's 4 million dead from just 5 factors that are, as he acknowledged at the time, a severe, severe underestimate. And malnutrition was one of them. This research was being conducted at a time when climate attribution as a field was still being developed, so he was way, way ahead of the curve. And it was also a time when climate denial was on the rise worldwide, so it was doubly difficult to get done what he was trying to get done. So he forecast that it wasn't just going to be drought and heat and extreme weather events that decimated worldwide food supplies. It was also that rising temperatures themselves would leach nutrients from crops. Looking back, it's hard to face the fact that we had the data that showed that the climate change crisis would lead to a serious food crisis way back in the 1990s. We suspected then that the developed world would be responsible for the deaths of millions. And you know what happened in the decade since? Not really much of anything, to be quite honest. Rebecca, you started working in Congress in the 1990s. You have decades of experience working in the belly of the beast, trying to get lawmakers and their staff to understand issues like hunger. So what can you tell us about the ways in which lawmakers and companies, the entities you spend time working with, are thinking about global hunger? Are they aware of the stakes?
Well, thank you. And you said the 1990s were a long time ago, and then you referenced my bio. So thanks
sorry
for that. Especially being mindful I'm the head of the Youth Council right after this. So, the thing is Congress isn't a monolith, right? There are 535 congressional offices, and it's like 535 small businesses. And everybody cares about some aspect related to global hunger. And it's one of the reasons I love this issue. It's one of the few remaining issues that brings together Republicans and Democrats to work on solutions. And the reasons why they're there range from just the humanitarian connection, feeling like it's the right thing to do. Some folks are very tied to U.S. agriculture and see the connection between U.S. agriculture and feeding folks around the world. Some folks are interested in climate, gender, nutrition. There are myriad reasons why people are interested in the issue of global hunger. So what we do is we try and meet people where they are. What are they interested in? Let's go and talk to you through that lens, and then tell the story in a broader way once we've got you engaged, where you're already paying attention. National security is another lens as well. I think that was touched on by a couple of folks earlier. And again, if that's what gets us in the door and gets the conversation, we'll take it.
So there's bipartisan interest in solving the hunger crisis internationally?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We really work hard to keep folks connected. You know, Barron mentioned that one of the things that we do is we take congressional staff to the field. We've gone to Kenya twice in the last 2 years. Equal number of Republicans and Democrats, folks from the Senate, folks from the House, and show them World Food Program's work up close and personal. And this is some instances where it is a traditional context of handing out food in a refugee setting. Some of it is the livelihood development that I know was spoken about earlier too. And it changes them. Anybody who's been to the field has changed, but then it comes back and these folks really understand in a deep, meaningful way what a piece of legislation or what a grant bucket that WFP and other NGOs can receive funds from, what that means in changing the lives of individuals around the world.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I wonder, when you go out in the field with these lawmakers and other folks, is there an understanding once they see, and actually, could you also describe what they're seeing when they go to, Somalia, for example, or another place dealing with severe drought and hunger and other issues related, like locust swarms, et cetera, fueled by climate change. Is there an understanding among these folks that developed countries are largely responsible for this crisis, or is it more like, oh, this is terrible, we should do something about this?
So the latter is true. This is terrible. We should do something about this. The conversation around climate with policymakers has really evolved. I'd say 10 years ago, you'd go into some offices, and climate would be a four-letter word. I would say because of what everybody's seeing back home in their districts and their states, whether it's fires, droughts, floods, hurricanes, nobody can deny that climate change is here, real. There are extreme climate events. I mean, Southeast right now with the hurricane that came about so quickly. There's still some discussion and lack of alignment on sort of the causes and solutions necessarily, but climate as a driver of these things is very real. So what do we see in the field? Certainly, like I mentioned, the traditional sort of feeding programs, but then also some of the resiliency programs. We were up in the northern part of Kenya in Kakuma, and there's some really smart projects around resilience that are it's the World Food Program, the United Nations FAO, and the government of Kenya have come together to capture the limited amount of water that falls up there. And it was interesting between the two trips. One was in October of 2022, and then the last one was February of this year. And when we were there the first time, they were in the middle of the fourth failed rainy season in a row, and water was scarce. But because of these programs that have been put into place, they have water pans, so essentially mounds of dirt built up, to retain the limited amount of water and rain when it falls from the sky, so that folks have access to that. It doesn't just run off or seep into the ground. Also, as Barron mentioned earlier, some of the hydroponic technology for growing produce. And so just seeing how those smart solutions were allowing this area that there were still problems. The livestock was dying off because there just wasn't enough water to go around, but the communities could support themselves and their families as a result. And so I think seeing that really drove it home. And then when we were back in February, the drought had broken, the rain had come, and the contrast as far as the amount of water that was in these water pans was really stunning, but the impact was crystal clear.
Yeah. I ask about culpability because it's become such a central theme of climate change negotiations internationally. I mean, at the next COP, the Conference of the Parties that happens annually, the big climate change conference, the theme of the next COP is going to be about how do developed countries fund climate adaptation projects in developing countries. I mean, to what extent do we bear the responsibility for what's going on? And if you look at the science, you see that, it's almost 100%, because Africa, let's just take the whole continent, emits very few carbon emissions compared to much larger developed countries elsewhere. So, I guess I wonder, again, have you noticed over the decades, I mean, you've been working on this for a long time, you say climate change used to be a four-letter word. Things seem to have shifted to some extent, at least on the left, to some extent on the right. Although not too much. Do you see sort of an awakening and understanding among lawmakers, especially, about sort of the severity of the crisis?
I think folks are definitely seeing the severity of the crisis. Like I mentioned, they're seeing it at home, and I think that that's making it tangible and real and observable in a way that's making a difference to their constituents. And it's something that folks are saying, okay, we're going to have, just in the U.S. context, insurance claims are going up from extreme climate events, right?
Florida, California.
And how are we mitigating against these? And then that conversation is carrying over into thinking about sort of, as a global crises driven by climate continue to grow and grow, while also, as mentioned earlier, conflict is, of course, the biggest driver of hunger globally, and that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But how can we mitigate that? How can we do some of these resilience programs, like I mentioned in Kenya? And those are just examples. There are plenty in almost every country where the World Food Program works. How can we be thoughtful about the investments that we're making to minimize the impact that these climate shocks are having on folks most in need?
We're about to hear from a panel of folks who are working to raise awareness especially among young people, about worldwide hunger. And a question I have, I don't know who else saw the headlines about Namibia and other countries in southern Africa culling elephants to feed people who are starving. That made headlines for, I think, weeks. And, I saw on my Instagram people bemoaning the death of those elephants, and any death of an elephant is horrible, to be sure, but people are starving to death. I think that the issue there is that there's sort of a lack of understanding that millions are starving, in large part due to rising global emissions and rising temperatures. They're dealing with impacts that they never had to deal with in the past. So my question for you is, why is there this mismatch between, why is it easier for us to feel empathy for elephants?
I can't answer that, but I can. But I can say, well, one, we are so excited about the Youth Council, and I mean, what a way to close out the day. I can't wait for you all to hear from them. But it really is a matter of educating yourself first, getting information about what's going on with global hunger. What are some of the solutions that are out there that the World Food Program is providing, both as far as feeding folks today, but helping with those resilience and livelihoods projects later on. And then sharing that information with policymakers. I mean, these folks work for you. It should not be intimidating to reach out to somebody who's in Congress to say, I care about this issue and I want you to care about it as well. And here's what I want you to know about it. We were talking backstage, child of the 80s, and the Ethiopia famine of 83, 84 was a really formative event for me. And if you went outside in 1984 and asked people if they knew that there was a famine in Ethiopia, probably 9 out of 10 people in the street would say yes. And it's because our news was so focused on ABC, CBS, NBC, and whatever your local newspaper was. They were all talking about it. Now with media so decentralized, if you went out there right now, I'd be shocked if you had 3 people that knew that there was a famine in Sudan right now. And so I'm really excited about the power that this Youth Council, the power that network that we're getting ready to launch later this year to engage youth broadly across the country, the power that that holds to really come together and draw attention to the global hunger needs around the world, so that we're talking about famine in Sudan and what's needed to address that. I feel bad for the elephants, but I really want to focus on the people.
Yeah. You already alluded to this, but it seems that the next generation is giving you some measure of hope. Is there anything else that is, we're staring down the barrel of sort of, no matter how many climate interventions we put in place right now, the world will continue to warm. If we stopped emitting emissions tomorrow, the world will continue to warm. Impacts will continue to stack up. People will die and starve. What makes you hopeful? You are in this line of work. You're working with people that make change. What makes you feel hope about the future in light of, this sort of depression that sometimes envelops me, at least?
So I started working in the apparently I've been around DC forever, according to you. But
yeah, according to me. That's what I said.
But I worked on the Hill, and I was actually a corporate lobbyist for combined about 18 years before I joined the anti-hunger space about 11 years ago. And at the time, my daughter was 8, and the shift in my job was going to cause some disruption on the family schedule. So we were talking about dinner with the kids and letting them know I was going to be traveling more and in the office more. And that night I was tucking Sarah into bed, and she's 8 years old, and you could see her mind kind of going. She's like, well, Mom, if your job is to help end hunger, if you do your job, then they're not going to need you to do that work anymore. And that's what gives me hope is I think we forget, we get jaded. We're like, this problem's been out there forever. But I always channel my daughter and her 8-year-old of like, yes, we can do this. We know what to do. The solutions are out there. We just need to come together and be focused on it. So just continuing to believe that it's possible.
Thanks so much, Rebecca.
Absolutely. Thank you.